Hello everyone and welcome to Truth and Law. My name is Conrad Rogas and I will be delivering a presentation entitled Babyface Criminality. And this presentation will be about exposing the criminal behavior of people in positions of authority from a street level perspective. And also I'll psychologically analyze the mindset of a criminal, what makes a criminal, and then talk about my own history as a criminal and expose the former mindset. And then of course I will give the solutions. So my website is truthandlaw.com and this presentation is an addendum to Streetwise Spirituality by Mark Passio. And this entire presentation I'd like to dedicate it to Mark Passio. And I also call back to that presentation, use some of the slides. The reason I dedicate this presentation to him is because that's who inspired me to convince me to take this information public, to speak out, to echo the information that has been spoken by many of the great truth tellers in history. And this is my 29th video that I've made. This is my 5th or 6th full-length presentation. And it's been exactly a year since I made my first presentation, which was entitled Dependence on Systems of Control. So, just to go for a full circle, I think it's about time to give credit to the man. And one of the reasons why he's so successful is because people could sense the authenticity on the street level. Because Mark is a former Satanist, right, who was in the dark occult and then went away from that mindset and went to exposing the people he was working with. And this presentation will echo some of that, because I think humanity is this way, is that we're very cautious when we learn things unless we could sense that it's coming from somebody that we can relate to. This is kind of like a mental Achilles heel we have. We're not confident enough in our mental processing to learn about something and extract those abstract concepts and put it into a concrete thought and apply it to everyday life unless it's coming from a source that we can trust, unless we could sense the realness and the emotion and the authenticity behind it. You know, even if we theoretically hold something to be true, we don't actually know until we see it on the ground level happening to us or someone we know. So that's what I'm doing with this presentation, because it's really like a summary of my life, and I'm going to take advantage of that life experience, those mistakes that I have made, to bring this information forward, because like Mark, I'm going to blow the whistle on criminality. And I know a lot of the, people don't have the exact experiences that I have in this realm, and this doesn't mean that I'm like one of these 15-year felons who can tell you about, you know, hard crime, or like a mafia hitman. Let's pump the brakes. I was not on that level of being a criminal, but you know, it is a very direct and personal perspective on the reality that is criminals and psychopaths functioning in the world unchallenged. And functioning in the world unchallenged, I do know a bit about that, because this is how I was operating. And the way the criminals in power operate is exactly the same. And this presentation is all about that. And the reason I'm going to begin by talking about my personal experience is because we as people don't really believe people that we can't relate to. But this is like a prequel to Streetwise Spirituality, because that presentation needs to be revisited now more than ever, because the people are not streetwise. And that's why I'm calling back to the title, Streetwise Spirituality, talking about streetwise. Streetwise was repeating in my head when I'm making this. And the people are not streetwise, especially my generation. I was born in 1996. My peers are not streetwise at all, you know. And that lack of real world skills is being taken advantage of in a very serious way. So that's another reason for this presentation. Let's talk about streetwise. That term carries two meanings, right? What does it mean to be streetwise? One is you get your practical, real-world ability, where concrete knowledge can be applied, as opposed to abstract knowledge, as opposed to book knowledge. It's just a real-world knowing how to do things. you know how to fix a drain, this and that. That's one definition, and the other definition of streetwise is knowing how to maneuver, survive, and exist in a potentially dangerous environment with unseen threats. This is like being hood smart. This is being street smart in a toxic environment. And this presentation will explore both, because what we have in our daily world, many people think that it's the first one. The first one that people don't have. They're losing their real world ability. They don't know how to send a package. They don't know how to get things done. They don't know how to complete normal adult tasks. But the second one is important too. And it's going to be a lot about the second, about being streetwise in the sense that you would need to be streetwise to survive in jail or in the ghetto among criminals and predators. The second one is the important one. Not streetwise in knowing where to park so your car doesn't get snowed in. We're talking about street survival, existing in an environment dominated by predators. And in the presentation Streetwise Spirituality by Mark Passio, Mark lays out 20 characteristics of what it truly means to be awake. That's what Streetwise Spirituality was about. Around that time is when the New Age movement was really coming into its own, and it's still going strong, the New Age. And just like the New Age misses these things, and just like the term streetwise, awake has two definitions. It's not just one thing either. What does it mean to be awake or enlightened? Awake is coming online to the knowledge of the true self and an existence and purpose of larger than three-dimensional life on earth. That's like the deep spiritual meaning. To be awake, to be up and have opened your eyes to the real self and the reality behind just from birth till death, linear life. Awake has to do with the fractal universe and so forth. That's the deep spiritual meaning. Then there's the second meaning, which is the state of being alert, able to detect and process what's happening in the environment. That's your basic book definition of awake. Just being up, having your eyes open, taking in environmental stimuli, knowing what's going on. And that's what this presentation will really focus on. Not the deep definition of awake, not the definition of spiritually awake that Mark talks about in Streetwise Spirituality. We're going to look at the other half of just being aware. Just being able to take in what's going on. Just knowing what's outside our door. And then I have to answer the first question before I begin, which is why. Why I'm even here. Why are you here? Why I even do presentations. The answer to that is, this presentation seeks to expose to the world that the world is run by psychopaths, proving that criminals run the world. This is the age-old dilemma, showing people that they are enslaved. This is like Frederick Douglass or Nat Turner who is a freed slave. He's a free man now, and he's going back to the plantation with the slaves and trying to tell them, if you come with me, you can be free, you can live a better life. And the slave says, what do you mean? I'm not a slave. This is just how we live life. What are you talking about? Age-old dilemma. So this is just another attempt in proving that the state of the world is slavery, and therefore to call for the people to stop supporting slavery and stop helping these people. And this presentation will endeavor to prove that. But I know most of the viewers are going to know that. If you're watching this, you probably already know the state of the world. So it is a bit of preaching to the choir, but it's not just preaching to the choir, because even if you know this information, I will offer a unique perspective of criminality in this presentation and highlight a key portion of the solutions. And that's where my personal experience comes in, and I'll get to that soon. But one more first order of business. We have to define babyface. People, especially translating it to different languages, people are like, what does babyface mean? What are you talking about? Are you talking about real babies? No, I'm not talking about real babies. So, the term babyface is a professional wrestling term. From professional wrestling, which people don't realize how important and historically influential that is. But the babyface is the character that fights clean. He's honorable. He waves to the people and he's got the great smile. Everybody loves him. They come to see him, and they cheer for him again to win against the bigger, stronger, dishonorable guys. A babyface in wrestling has a moral code. He respects authority, he respects the referee, he respects the announcers, and he's cheered by the people. He'll shake hands, he'll sign autographs. He's not cocky. He's a noble, upstanding person. That's the babyface. And the babyfaces fight the heels. The opposite of a babyface is a heel, who's the bad guy. And the heel is the person who cheats, who breaks the rules, who wins undeservingly. Cheats, he may be more powerful, but he does not play by the rules. He's not cheered by the people, he's booed. He's the guy who will do anything to get it done, and ultimately he is always seen as undeserving. He gets his victories, his gold, his conquests in a dishonorable way, in an undeserving way. And that's who I was. I was the heel. Your normal criminal that you're going to see in the street, the normal person you imagine when you think of the word criminal, is going to be the heel. You're going to see the heel. And let's go right to it. Here is my background in crime. This is a bit of my resume, because I am a reformed criminal. Just gonna say it straight up. This is my record from my first arrest in 2014. So this was just my beginning, my first arrest. So you're not going to see, you know, a long record. That was my first one. I was 18. I spoke before in my presentations about being a drug dealer, you know, but that's not really a crime. I'm here to talk about what I was actually doing that's immoral, okay? So, from my teenage years into my early 20s, I was basically a person who's dangerous, unpredictable, and didn't particularly care about anyone other than myself. So, I was 100% an immoral person. So, as I've said before, every day, drug buying, drug selling, street gun purchases, hit and runs being standard procedure, you know, just not being respectful of other people's property at all. Drunk driving on a routine basis, you know, nothing special. The occasional robbery or assault, fraud, theft, and luckily nothing more than that. Luckily I never really caused serious damage to anybody, so I'm very fortunate for that. But I was ready to. I was always ready to in that mindset. So that's why I will talk about it, and I won't downplay my involvement in the criminal world. I wasn't on a Pablo Escobar high level, but I'm not going to downplay it and say it was nothing. Because us who are part of the criminal underground, we tend to downplay everything. Oh, what did you do? Oh, not much. Nothing happened. We roughed him up a little bit. But it deserves to be spoken, you know. All of those things that I mentioned, those crimes I committed, that's not even mentioning the pain and deception, the pain caused by deception and psychological abuse of those close to me. Because when you're somebody like that, you're still living with your family, you're still interacting with people, and engaging in the things you engage in, it's causing a lot of damage to them, right? So this is a very toxic way to live. Most people are in denial about that, but let's talk more about why I did the things I did. There were a few issues I never resolved in my adolescence, right? So my solution, which was really not a solution, it was procrastination, was to become a bit of an outlaw. So being able to do whatever I want with no structure, my rules only, and that way I could avoid criticism. I didn't ever like criticism, and that way I wouldn't take any disrespect, right? Because anybody offends me, I could just, you know, I could just snap on them. I could just, you know, do whatever I want. I'm not bound by the social boundaries of rules. So I would respond to anything that offended me with either like the cold shoulder, ice cold indifference, basically, you know, cold shoulder, or vicious psychological warfare, you know, which criminals know how to do, the smart ones. They'll know how to beat you mentally so that they don't have to put hands on you. Or the always ready willingness to engage in physical combat at any hint of disrespect. You know, just that's what defines a criminal, just being ready to fight always, you know, real survival mode. But I'm nothing special when it comes to that, right? There are probably like 100,000 people like that in the Chicagoland area where I'm from, that could fit that description, because there are estimated to be 100,000 to 150,000 gang members in this area, and the Cook County Jail gets 100,000 inmates a year, right? So I'm nothing special when it comes to that. I'm not the peak. I'm not the 1% of the harshest criminals at all, and I was never a high-ranking criminal at all. But I am probably the only one who makes presentations and loves philosophy. So that's why I got to talk about it from a whistleblower perspective, because there are so many things I've learned from this lifestyle, and the knowledge doesn't get out. Another reason that knowledge doesn't get out is that very few of us ever come back from being that close to the abyss, to the criminal underground. You know, being alive, free, and with your mental faculties intact. Because the top predator of the predator class, so the predator class is the criminals, but the predator of the predator class, the big predator, is drugs and alcohol. And that wipes out all these criminals. Which are drugs and alcohol. The addictions to drugs and alcohol are terminal diseases if left untreated. And addictions usually prevent those like me from converting that experience into knowledge, and even less into action, right? But I was able to break free from that. That's why my first presentation 1 year ago exactly was dependence on systems of control. The dynamic of conquering addiction is put together with basically the encouragement and the fire from Mark Passio. That's what made me do this work. I had to get sober. Without getting sober, this would not be happening. So that was the main thing, freeing myself from that predator. And now I could fight the real predators and expose them. Anyway, coming from that, I want to contribute to the truth and freedom movement and the great work by presenting the state of the world through that lens of street crime. Because that's how I see the world still. Once you see it, you're always looking at it that way. So I would consider myself an expert in street crime, and you know, a significant part of Mark's message, why it has reached so many people, is that he blew the whistle on the satanic hierarchy and blew the whistle on their mindset. And while the criminal underground is like below and outside the satanic hierarchy, the ideology is the same, and ultimately they are in the hierarchy. They are building the satanic New World Order system. And it's a lot of the gang stuff is low-level masonry, dark masonry, which I may do a presentation about that. But while they are outside the satanic hierarchy, I would like to corroborate the testimony of Mark's work by sharing my experience, and as they say, it takes one to know one. So let's talk about the criminals. I mentioned addictions being the top predator of the predator class. Low-level street criminals consider themselves predators, and so do high-level criminals. And the difference is, I was a criminal, I looked like one, I acted like one. If somebody saw me get searched or on the street, or terrorizing the neighborhood with loud music, they wouldn't look to their child and say, you know, that's a successful man right there. Because I wasn't a successful man. But the high-level criminals, they play the baby face. So people think that they're successful and they're good people. They are the executives, the occupational authorities, and heads of institutions. And the people look up to them and say, that's our guy. So I'll play two entrance themes of exactly those individuals, the baby faces.
Dusty, your fans welcome you back, man. First of all, I would like to thank the many fans throughout this country that wrote cards and letters to Dusty Rhodes, the American Dream, while I was down. Secondly, I want to thank Jim Crockett Promotions for waiting and taking the time, because I know how important it was.
That's who they are, and this presentation aims to expose and tear down those illusions. But for that to happen, we need some more historical context. So finally, let's begin the presentation. Taking it back to the why aren't people streetwise? What went wrong and when? Let's go back 100 years. Are people streetwise 100 years ago? I would say so. 50 years. Yeah, this is still the old way of life. People were largely streetwise. But then the internet is when this phenomenon begins. Because the incorporation of the internet created an entire new realm of life on Earth. And the overwhelming majority of people never learned to utilize it in any significant capacity. And being streetwise is deeply connected to the internet. And it sounds paradoxical because it's on a screen. It seems like this has nothing to do with the street. But it's actually the opposite. You are viewing me right now on the internet. And the now common practice of searching for knowledge on the web has its roots in occult knowledge, what used to be like conspiracy searching. Let me just speak to how it is now, just looking for knowledge on the web. I work construction. I'll ask somebody, one of the masters, one of the people who have 20 years experience, how to do something. Like, oh, how do you know how to do this? He's just said, go on YouTube. And this seems funny, but this is really the way it's done now. If you don't know how to do something, you fire up the tutorial. Knowledge is found on the web instantaneously now. This is how we learn. This is a new realm of life. But I'm going to talk about the roots, because it wasn't always like that. It's now common to go to YouTube for all kinds of knowledge, but in the early years, most people, the average internet consumer, came to the internet for entertainment. And even I remember this. When I first started using a computer about 2005, it was a lot of cat videos and just entertainment. That's what YouTube was. And yes, in the background, the world of information was transitioning here. But the point at which regular people started to exchange serious information online, it had to do with conspiracy, it had to do with 9/11, it had to do with JFK. That's the roots, the grassroots of the real internet. And people want to distance themselves from that history. Most of us want to distance ourselves from the word conspiracy because of the ridicule over time and censorship in recent times, and myself included, who seeks truth and reform. We tend to strive for a very scholarly tone. We don't want to be that guy that yells into the camera. We want to make sure everything's scholarly, like Jordan Peterson does it. Scholarly and very professional, have that presentation tone. As opposed to the blunt, in-your-face style, the rough around the edges style of those conspiracy videos in the mid-2000s. And while I also take that approach, I also try to be scholarly. Let's not forget that these are the roots of the information being by the people and for the people, by the people and for everyone. This has to do with the internet, Books have been written about hidden history and hidden knowledge for hundreds of years, of course. But before the internet, peasants like you and I would have never been able to access it, right? They were not doing independent research, and even if they were, they couldn't share it instantly. And the internet takes away those problems of time and space limitation. I was just talking to a family member the other day. I was showing them one of the researchers I listened to, and they told me, in my time, we had people like this. There were people like this who were this smart, but you couldn't get into the lecture halls. You couldn't get a ticket to see them because they were that popular, and that was the limitation of, okay, you're going to have somebody present this, but how many people can you fit in a room? 50, 100, 300? That's only 300 people. And now everybody could see that instantaneously without leaving their couch, as opposed to collecting books and reading them and going to the library, registering there, having to find a book, having to take the time to go through the information, and then to convince them to take it into themselves and share it. It was an instant. And this used to be known as the conspiracy-oriented area. But now, with the knowledge of corruption being so instant and extensive, more eyes are on it. And whereas, say in 2005 or 2008, when you talked about the truth, you kind of had a singular signal. But now it's a storm of different agendas, ideologies, and schools of thought. So it's no longer a narrow, well-defined signal. It's like a wide, nosy signal. Somebody talks about the truth of what's going on in the world. They could be talking about a whole lot of things. But let's talk about this timeline, you know. How old is the conspiracy area? Of course, since the beginning of time, people were aware of corruption, secrets, and tried to change the world. Like, who's a good example? Jesus Christ did this. He was one of these people. But as far as knowledge being freely available to everyone, like you and I, who is not limited by not having enough money or not having enough time, this area of life is about 25 years old, in my estimation and in my research. You know, the area where regular people can communicate about serious information, about important topics without being a qualified expert in it, without being vouched for by institutions. You know, you can just look it up and see, no matter who you are. About 25 years old. That's how I see it. You know, knowledge has always been costly. It's always been kept away from the commoners and from the general public through a lack of resources, and separated by space and time, your temporal restrictions. I talked about going to the library, or, you know, before, people were in the world were either under programming, so like the bourgeoisie, the aristocracy, people in cities, they were believing in the system, or they were unreachable by programming, say the farmers, the people who live in rural areas, who are part of a tribal situation. They were unreachable by programming. It would never get to them, but they would also not be a threat to the system. They would just be outside. Or they were the members of occult orders. They were those in the know. And there were so few of them is that those three worlds did not mix. And that's how it was before the internet. But the internet opened up the possibility to learn about the criminals in power. So let's look at that timeline. Before 2000, I was born 96, so this is not from personal experience, but around those times this information was starting to float, where the internet was not widely available yet, but you had talk radio, you did have the communication becoming more instant, modernized, and there was talk about the paradigm shift, where people were going to wake up to their higher self, and the world was going to change. Also talking about Y2K, which was kind of, you know, the JFK assassination was before that, but it was one of those like real popular conspiracies, I guess, or that kind of situation where the clock is going to hit 2000. It's going to be Y2K. This is going to happen, and this and that. It really got people talking about something that's abstract and hidden. And then you had the Age of Aquarius, which of course, based on the Mayan calendar, in the precession of the equinoxes, we're entering in the Age of Aquarius, or have entered, or in the process of entering it. And these kind of more abstract concepts, spiritual concepts, this is all leading up to the year 2000, where the interest is going up a bit. Not very many people have extra interest in it, but it's increasing. And you still don't have as much access to information, because this is just when the internet is being developed and brought in. It's not a one-to-one basis where everybody has a computer in their house, but it's increasing, and the access to information was beginning to increase. And when 9/11 happened, the interest in occult knowledge and conspiracy shot up, because so many people were pointing out what happened, you know, what happened on that day. And the access to the information is increasing with time, increasing and increasing, and then you see YouTube was launched in 2005. So at that point, you know, people had a computer, people had access, and the access shot up. So it was it was widely available instantaneously to get information. And then you had a whole lot of interest in this kind of stuff that people were talking about. The Bilderberg Group and Bohemian Grove, you know, this knowledge was gaining more steam. And then you're seeing it, of course the access to information is going to continue to increase, but you're seeing the interest in conspiracy knowledge has actually decreased. It's decreased a lot, and people who have been doing this longer than me will tell you that things seem to be better as far as conscious, awareness and consciousness of the people, it was a lot better in around 2010. It was a lot better 10, 15 years ago. Now the people are in a worse state, a more programmed state. And the reason for that is a lot of countermeasures have taken place, like smartphones being rolled out. So having a phone definitely decreased the interest. And then you had the social media age, which went hand in hand with that. And when people are thinking about social media, thinking about the interactions with people, being obsessed with that, that kind of, there's more consumption of that and social interactions as opposed to actual taking in of research. And now 2020 and currently continuing is what I call the acceleration age, and this will be another presentation I'll make, is that the technology that we have is developing and increasing in rate. It is going much faster than our consciousness can increase to keep up with it. So what's going to happen is we're going to get censored by being flooded with information. And that's why the current trend is the interest in occult knowledge and conspiracy knowledge is going to go down through the floor as we have unlimited access. That's what's going on, and it is information overload. It's consolidating by flooding of information. It's censorship by sequestering. So you're not going to be censored just because you can't access the information. You're going to be censored because what the information you're getting filtered to you, because you can't access all of it because of how much there is. But you have filters around you that are going to direct what kind of information you take in. And that's going to create basically a loop where you're going to get censored by the kind of filters that filter the information that you can physically receive. So categorizing information, splitting people into those different social groups, and social media plays a part in this. And this is what I call the anti-internet, which is what we're building. We're building the anti-internet, where you can find anything, but you won't find anything because there's too much and you don't know where to look. So the conclusion to this slide is that people are as dumb as they are now because they were raised by a generation that didn't learn how to navigate the internet. Maybe they know how to use it, but they don't have the street smarts to read between the lines and maneuver through the real wolves out here. So let's talk about the wolves and their wolf-like behavior. So the American dream: to make a living, you have to have a good job. You want to have a good job, so you have to go to school. And the educational system has a monopoly on training and certification, right? So corporations with a monopoly, they do this as a standard practice. They charge ridiculously high prices. I'm talking about the educational institutions. Why wouldn't they charge that much? With the information available, you could go to the web and learn all the information you need to be an X-ray technician's assistant or an insurance agent. You could probably do that for free. And then having the requisite knowledge, you could demonstrate that knowledge and begin learning on the job, or, just like a graduate fresh out of college with a bachelor's degree would do. But of course you cannot do that because the corporations will only accept you and recognize you if you have done business with an educational institution. In other words, you need the degree. You need some kind of diplomas. And then you go to school, you do that because you're chasing the American dream. And if you were to pay for that schooling yourself, you would have to take out a loan. And when you finish your training, your certification, and you start paying back your loan, one, your prices have increased relative to earnings. The prices are higher. And two, you have your hidden tax called inflation that has devalued the currency. So by the time you get to paying back what you borrowed, you're paying back more, right? You've been played. And it has always been this way. You've seen how much prices and taxes have increased with inflation recently, right? How high has your raise been in that time? Because if we're paying more, I understand inflation, we have to pay more. We have to pay more in taxes. So that way we have to make more too, right? Because if it's going to increase, it has to increase across all scales. But no, we still make the same amount. If we have gotten a raise, it's minuscule. And it's actually much harder to find work Now, we hear that there's a shortage of available workers and that there's more jobs than there are workers, but when it comes to actually finding a job, it's not that easy. People with a college degree are a dime a dozen these days, meaning there's a lot of them. It's not as valuable. And it actually turns out that an illegal immigrant who doesn't know the language might actually have an easier time in finding a job that meets his qualifications, as opposed to the graduate finding a job that meets his qualifications. They're not going to find the same jobs, but as far as the job they're qualified to do, the general laborer will have an easier time. Like, there's no problem finding work in the realm where I am. If you can do general labor, if you can do construction, you're fine right now. We have work, but I know people that are trying to get more corporate or desk jobs. It's not that easy for them. 25 years ago, I know this from people who were here 25 years ago. I wasn't. They were. It used to be like if you were born in the United States and knew English, life was a breeze. You were set. You could live comfortably and make a good living, not even working that hard. And it seems like those good times have ended. Hardship is officially here, and the American dream is falling apart. But that was the American dream. Let's talk about the American reality, and this is what it looks like. The man with the briefcase is not actually going up a staircase to get what he wants. He's going on the hamster wheel, trying to reach for the dollar sign that's dangled by the occult controllers. And as you can see in this scheme, let me just go through it. Yes, the IRS, the Federal Reserve, they're dangling the money and they're projecting that dream of the house and the kids and the car. But they're criminals. They're participating in racketeering. And as you get on the other side of that hamster wheel, or you run along the hamster wheel, you have gotten old, and then the state's agents come for you. And then the next generation, they're going to be raised up in front of the TV to want the American dream, and that's going to motivate them to keep running along the hamster wheel. Not seeing the real situation, but this is racketeering. It is an elaborate scheme of taking people's money. That's what it is. Racketeering is a type of organized crime in which the perpetrators set up a coercive, fraudulent, extortionary, or otherwise illegal coordinated scheme or operation to repeatedly or consistently collect a profit. And many people will say, life's not fair, that's just how it is. And that's cynical. People just have no sense of dignity. We're supposed to work ourselves to death for what? No self-respect. And that's why that definition in that picture, to extract illegal profits, that's why it says illegal and not immoral. What it really is immoral, first of all. But people don't know about morality, and the reason we have legal law in effect and not moral law is so that criminals and psychopaths in government can get away with it. And this is what society is. It's a top to bottom scheme. From the mental anxiety of boys sitting in front of the TV and pressuring high school kids to make decisions about their future, to the debt collectors and the police officers. This is all mafia behavior. It's just a white glove, straight up refined form of theft. So that no one can actually prove that these people did something wrong, because you set up an entire system and set of circumstances in a way that directs and funnels the money from the victim's pocket to yours, but not directly. So you have plausible deniability. And these are the criminals that prey on the middle and upper class. For example, in the 1900s, the racketeering actually targeted the lower class. And you had what's called a numbers racket, a numbers game, which basically was, you can pick a 3-digit number, so you have a 1 in 999 chance of winning, and they would do basically like a street lottery, and the winner would make $600 by betting $1, right? If he's the winner, he'll win about $600. And the person organizing it takes $399 profit. Easiest money in the world to make. All because there's always a sucker out there who's going to give his $1 up for the chance to see 1,000. And this is all happening because of the dynamic of dreaming. Like the American dream, racketeering is held up by the dreamers. But what happened to the numbers game? It went out of business. We don't have that no more. Just like the moonshiners and bootleggers went out of business. Why? Did the people become any better? Did they grow up to the scheme? No, the lottery just became legal. And alcohol became legal in the same way. And the racket became legal. And just because the odds of winning the lottery have changed, you can buy it at the store and you see it on TV. You don't have to talk to a shady guy in your neighborhood. That does not make it any less racketeering. The scheme is the same. And what's changed is who's in charge. It's not the mafia anymore, it's the state and federal governments. And let's not forget who stands behind the schools and the realtors and the inspectors. It's the government. It's centralized authority. And that's who takes all these taxes and fees. It's not some type of complex and unrelated people and obstacles that are preventing you from making the dream a reality. It is a single entity. There is a top predator out here, and it's the federal government. And that's who preys on the middle class. But who preys on the working class, like me, people like me? Who are their predators? So, the criminals in lower income communities are your classic heels. Guy with the black hoodie on, your pimps, drug dealers, gang members, kind of the people I dealt with. Think you don't deal with these people? I bet you do. Working class people tend to have a sharp and developed sense that the suits in Washington are crooks. If you live in the city, everybody or the smart people kind of know this. They have real world knowledge and experience, and they're not that easy to fool on the street. Most of them are well aware that there is injustice going on around them, and they don't have as much faith in the societal institutions as the college-educated middle and upper classes do. But they obey the enforcement arm of those institutions nonetheless. See, the predator is different. For those people that choose to not play along with the American dream, there's a different class of predators. And this is what they do. Especially here where I live, Chicago, the Polish community in Chicago, which is huge. Most men out here who are Polish in Chicago are working construction, and most women, Polish women in Chicago, are cleaning. They're in the cleaning service. And that's just what the working class does, and they get racketeered in a different way. One is getting double taxed, right? Your cost, because you're buying small versus buying in bulk, which means you're going to go check the check, you're going to have worse credit. You're going to have to make purchase decisions quickly and under pressure, which reduces your judgment. You have to buy worse cars, used cars, which break down more often. So then you get charged more for insurance. And you also live in worse areas because there are more inevitable, unexpected living costs, like those costs of living with those hooded criminals over there, right? Somebody's gonna scratch your car and break your window. This happens, and this is getting double taxed because you're paying more because you have less. Then you have your trivial demands, which is compliance. You're targeted by the police for all sorts of things because it costs money to comply with all of the unnecessary, redundant, and ridiculous regulatory demands. Having your sticker displayed properly, parking this far away from the street, finding parking on a street that has no room, keeping up with the street cleaning, the snow shoveling, the construction zones, making sure that all of your trash fits in the garbage can that's too small to fit it all, violating any codes on any little piece of property that you do own. That's what happens to these people. Anybody could write on a piece of paper that you owe them money, which is called a ticket. That does not make it any more legitimate in reality. It's just that the street criminals, they don't like to leave a written record. They're not that brazen. But the high-level criminals, the area of legal language and writing stuff down, and tickets and appeals and forms and judges, that's their territory. And they're not scared to operate there. And unfortunately, the criminals win because the people vouch for their authority. When you talk about extortion, like a strong-arm extortion, basically threatening somebody with violence and taking their money, you got three roles in that, right? You got your strong arm, which is the actual thief, which is the guy that's going to come up to you and be like, let me hold $1. You got that guy. But usually there's the friend, the objective juror. You're going to have somebody that looks like they're not together with him, and he's going to try to talk you into giving your money away. And then you have the third role, the third person, which is the lookout. You may not see him, but that third person is always there when these acts go on in the neighborhood. He's in the background making sure nothing goes down. And that's us in this system. Yes, we play that role. You know, we play that role by vouching for this government and going to their courts and all that. We do that. And to understand how, we need to understand natural law. So here's the first slide that I'm using from Mark Passio's Streetwise Spirituality. Talking about right and wrong, like, look at the elegance and simplicity, how amazing this is, how this is not anything complicated. It is just about right and wrong, and there is a clear yes and a clear no, and morality is just about not resulting in harm to others. Actions that are wrong or incorrect or immoral just result in harm to others. And the reason I bring that up is because those crimes that they give you the tickets for, there's nothing actually wrong with parking in an unauthorized lot that has 50 empty spaces and your street has 12. You know, if there's no victim, there's no crime. These are just criminals whose criminal friends vouch for you, vouch for their legitimacy, their criminal friends. The lawmakers vouch for the police's right to lock you up. The business executives vouch for the right for the lawmakers to make their laws because they lobby, aka pay them. They just pay them to pass the laws that favor them. The churches vouch for the corporate executives by being a tax-exempt entity, right? So they don't have to pay the taxes. And they take the donations and the donations, right? So they vouch for them. And ultimately, you vouch for it all. You're the ultimate voucher, right? You're the ultimate lookout. We're the slaves, but we're also the king. We're the ultimate oppressor because we say all of this is okay. We do this by putting money into the system and ultimately making money our god, which is what we've done. So yeah, these criminals all vouch for each other, like the lookout and the objective. The friend is going to say, yeah, I just saw you. Say this is how it goes in extortion. Say, oh, you just that's my wallet. You just had my wallet. I dropped it, and you're like, what are you talking about? This is my wallet. And then the friend is going to say, no, I saw him drop it just right now. You took his wallet, so give him his wallet back. Now you have two people. Now this has more power. And then you have the lookout, making sure that the person isn't able to fight back. And that's us. That's us vouching for it, doing nothing. While the person one and person two keep vouching for each other because you say, no, I don't have to pay this ticket because it's not right. So you go to the courts and the guy vouches for them saying, no, this is true, you do have to pay it. And then when the court makes that decision, then the police is going to say, okay, if you don't pay this, I'm going to arrest you. Then you say, no, you can't arrest me because I didn't do anything wrong. And then they say, yeah, you have, because it says right here in the law. So we vouch for this, right? You know, natural law can essentially be reduced to a single spiritual law. This is another slide from Streetwise Spirituality. And it is actually this simple. It could actually just be reduced to one law. One wrongdoing broken down to a mathematical level. If you don't want B, choose A. And what is that law? What is the answer to the, you know, harassment, coercion, extortion? We know it's wrong, right? We know those things are wrong. And why is it wrong? Like in the other slide, it's because it causes harm to others. And it violates the ultimate law that says, don't steal. You know, that sinking feeling when you find a ticket on your car, that's theft. You're feeling being a victim of theft. That's knowing that someone just wrongfully took away something that's yours when you did nothing wrong. You know, your car is yours. Your house is yours. I rent this apartment. It's my apartment. Now, I own it. I live here. I maintain it. Maybe I don't own the pipes because I pay the rent. I don't own the plumbing that's in here or the framing in the wall, but it is mine. If someone comes here and the door is locked, you can't go in. And if you do, you're violating my property, not the landlord's property. It's my property because I live here and I maintain it. It doesn't matter who pays the property tax on it, right? It's wrong for anyone to come here and claim that I owe them money because of something I did while I was just sitting here on the couch, right? That's wrong. But the street isn't mine, and neither is it anyone else's. We share the street, right? The only parts of the street that actually belong to somebody is the few square feet if a homeless person is laying and sleeping there. That's actually his property. Not because he pays to stay there, not because he owns a piece of paper that says he lives there, because he's physically there and that's where he lives. So you have to respect consciousness and life and the human dignity of that person being there. So he owns that piece of the street. But for everybody else, we're just sharing the street, right? So therefore, you can't pay a ticket just on parking somewhere where somebody says that's not the right way to park because they don't own it, right? And the presentation streetwise spirituality goes a long way to developing an understanding of property, which both New Age spiritual and traditional religious spiritual people think has nothing to do with spirituality. People wrongfully think that when you talk about property, you're talking about something ego-related. You're being selfish. People think that it's putting an importance on property, that's putting too much importance on the physical world, or that property is ego, but property is a massive part of understanding spirituality. In fact, this is how we glorify and honor the Creator, the spirit of creation, by recognizing it in everyone, including ourselves, and respecting the boundaries of all living beings. So it is very important to respect property. It's very spiritual to respect property. It's not selfish. It's not because I love what I own. It's not because I love my car. It's because I respect myself to not have it be trampled upon. Knowing and respecting property because you recognize it as originating from the divine, that's spirituality. But people don't want spirituality. They want a guru. Because seeking truth and purpose is a lonely road, where if you look behind you, there's only one set of footprints. People rarely develop the mix of inspiration and courage and desire for a better life to take that path. So instead, they look for the guru who could take them there and show them the way, tell them it's going to be okay. So let's look at the guru's qualities. This is who these people are. The nice clothes, the sweet talk, the manipulation, the charisma, the social skills, and government's main hustle, which is exchange for protection. You know, just like the prostitute gives the money to her pimp, partially because of the threat of violence, but mainly pimps make their money because their workers actually believe in the pimp's aura, right? Their cult of personality, their sweet talk, their charm, and their charisma, and their promises of a better life. You know, does that sound familiar? Look at the qualities, you know, you see your pimp right here. Master manipulator, excellent communication skills, and what does he do? He motivates sex workers to continue working for him against their own interests. That's basically what the institution of pimping is all about. Now, in my experience, I haven't. There's really no pimps anymore. Like in the life I experience, I know it still exists, but it's basically going out of business because of the internet. Because OnlyFans put the pimps out of business, you know. Pimps still exist, but it's scaled back a lot. Like, that aspect of it is changing. But on a societal scale, oh boy, pimping is alive and well. It is our elected leaders, our presidents and our priests, but especially the officials we vote for, right? The president is a master manipulator that spins a web of promises and pep talks you into another day of slavery. He gives you the light at the end of the tunnel in a miserable existence where nothing ever changes, but you go do it anyway. And how do they get this done? They make you think that you can't do it on your own. You know, every sex worker in human history could have made her living without the pimp. She just needs a gun and an awareness of self-defense skills. And all cultures in human history have built a civilization, could have built a civilization without a government or a ruler. They could have done that on their own. You know, the first time I've heard this comparison was about 12 years ago, where in a comedy special by Cat Williams, where he says he figured out and all the politicians are pimps, you know, and it was hilarious. But when you think about it, those two things that are being compared, the comparisons, the similarities, are so profound. It's so accurate, the pimp and government analogy, that it's mind-blowing. The similarities are endless. How does the pimp get his power? He tells his woman that she's not worth shit, right? That she'll never be shit, and that's why she needs him. And then he tells her he loves her. So there's toxic emotional manipulation of trauma and love, right? And he says he loves her and that nobody else is ever going to love her like he does, and that he's the only one that really understands her and looks out for her. And that's the messaging we get from our government. The government says that they're going to take care of us. We have retirement, we have economic stimulus, we have this and that. But on the other hand, if you step out of line even just a little bit, you get the bat over the head. And they say they're taking care of us, but also that everything bad in the world is our fault. Whether it's climate change or the war or why there's a pandemic, they say it's all our fault because one of us did something wrong. And that's mind control done by an abuser. And that's the only way the pimp stays in power. The only way the pimp stays in power is if the woman does not know her self-worth, right? And the way pimping as an institution stays in business is because the government made prostitution illegal. If it wasn't illegal, there are no pimps. Since these women have multiple arrests usually, they harass these people, they just arrest them and let them out. They can't obtain a FOID card to buy a gun legally, especially in the states where most prostitution is done. You're talking about LA, Chicago, New York, Vegas, the cities where they're going to have harsh gun laws, and they can't get it legally because they're criminals, because they've been arrested, even though there's no such thing as a crime of prostitution. This is not an immoral behavior because it does not cause harm to others, right? But why does nobody talk about that? Why the institution of government is an ally and an enabler of abusers and rapists? Because that's what pimps are. All of them are abusers and most of them are rapists. Why does nobody talk about the government being partnered with them? If it wasn't for government, the pimps are out of a job. They would actually have to work like the rest of us. What do these women need them for? You're saying they can't actually prevent someone from doing violence to them? Of course they can, but the government can't. But the woman can do that because she's there, and if she has a gun. The police can't really protect her anyway, because by the time they get there, it's going to be over with. So what does the woman need the pimp for? To find clients? Psh, please. Who can find a client better than the woman herself? So communication, manipulation, getting you to act against your self-interest. That's what these types of pimps do. They prey and profit off of the condition of self-hatred. And I know people are going to be offended by why I choose Barack Obama as my picture of the government pimp. And they're going to say I'm racist for that. It's not racial. Why Obama fits that perfectly is because he actually had the pimp charisma. He actually looked and talked like a pimp. He had the ability to speak, He had the ability to speak. He seemed genuine. He seemed real. You listened to what he had to say because he was able to say it in a way that's real. And that's what pimps do, The pimps are actually artists. There is a bit of an art to it. It's an immoral piece of shit thing to do. But these people do have a skill. They do have a nuance. They do have a lot of ability. They're an enigma. They are interesting people to watch, even though they are a train wreck who's immoral. But just to repeat that last statement, what these two types of pimps do, the government pimps and the actual pimps, is they profit and prey on the condition of self-hatred. But self-hatred, what goes along with that? What goes along with working a difficult, mundane job for long hours, a tough life like that? Not only the self-destructive behavior goes along with that, but the desire to escape. And that's drug use. Drug abuse, which by the way includes alcohol, is actually underestimated for the middle and upper class. But for the lower class, it's rampant because of the dead and unfulfilling lifestyle. And I'm not just talking about your normal drugs and alcohol. I'm talking about all these other things. The world is full of glorified drug dealers. The designer brand companies aren't selling you a chain or a shoe. It's not the actual bag of the substance that they're selling you. That's not when you're buying headphones, they're not selling you the headphones. They're selling the drug of affluence. These designer companies, the feeling of high social status. The car companies aren't selling you a car. They're selling you the feeling of freedom. That's why their ads say that. The feeling of being a boss, being able to walk outside and you're the man, or the feeling of being irresistible, of having ultimate freedom, as opposed to the drug dealer like I was, who I was just selling the drug. The coke dealers sell coke. It's basically what you need is what I got. That's what it is. But imagine a coke dealer with the manipulation skills of a pimp, and he's got a business card and a secretary. Now that's what the marketers and advertisers are. Because money, just like drugs, has everything to do with emotions. That desire for escape, that ability to have what you crave. And just like with drugs, money gets you on a chase, that hamster wheel, where no matter how hard you try, no matter how much effort you put in, what you crave will always be unattainable. It's always going to be somewhere else. That's what these things are, the nice jewelry, the bright lights, the nice car, the nice dinner, the nice clothes. These are all drugs. They're not drugs in nature on their own, but the way we make them drugs by the things that causes drug addiction is some kind of void or inner inadequacy. Just to step outside the presentation for a second, I do have to mention that even on my level of drug dealing, you are also, the good ones, they don't just sell the bag, they don't just sell the cocaine, they sell the feeling as well. The real good drug dealers, for me, there are a lot of people that have the product and you can get it, but the reason people buy it is because they want to spend the time with you. They want to have somebody to talk to do it there, because nobody really wants to do drugs in a corner under the covers, because that doesn't really get it done. You're still living in contradiction. What people really want is to go there and do that substance, get that feeling, but also have some kind of a social approval, or have somebody like the role I played who is going to basically be like the big brother. So that family dynamic that they're missing at home, they're going to be able to live that out and relax and kind of be themselves and be with a person who's going to accept them for who they are. Where at home, they're usually with people who don't accept who they are, and they feel like they have to hide and change. So that's what drug dealers do. They don't just sell the product. They're manipulators too, the good ones, the ones who know what they're doing. Chemical substances are the building blocks of psychological master sorcerers. The way money and affluence acts on our emotions is so strong. These people are the ultimate baby faces. We never see them, but the feelings they offer us build such a strong alliance that it really is as strong or stronger than the connection you feel with a mother or son or husband. Through these chemical substances, the dopamine, the serotonin, the adrenaline. Those feelings we develop based on certain products or interactions. It may even be stronger than those family bonds, and that's why I often repeat the statement that money is the god of this world. That feeling when you start the new car, the feeling of opening a cold beer after a hard day's work, or the feeling of snapping the necklace on, that will guarantee you affection and approval as soon as you step outside the door. Those are feelings, big time, strong feelings. And I'm somebody who quit the addictions of hard drugs, right? Alcohol and smoking, drinking soda, eating meat. I've quit all these addictions, so I understand the grip that these things have on people. And most people don't understand the strength of that grip because they never broken free from it and never really tried. You don't really know how strong the glue is on something until you try to rip it off. That's when you find out. And that's how babyface criminals stay in power. They work on human psychology, right? And the human mind, we're going to talk about the mind now a lot. It has one specific Achilles heel. And it's denial. And this is This is the slide that shows denial. The mental illness called denial. You know, crime is all about psychology. These are deep psychological concepts we're talking about now. Because without an error in psychology, there is no crime and there is no violence. Not for any extended period of time anyway. Because here's what happens when a criminal will target a mentally healthy person. The person is going to say, no, don't do that to me. Going to give them a half of a second of benefit of the doubt. And then they're going to put every molecule of their being to end that behavior.
Headshot, dead. That's it.
Headshot, dead. That's what happens. That's what would happen when a mentally healthy person encounters violence. To allow injustice to be done and to know it, you know, violence, theft, deception, this is actually mental illness. And everyone in this world is sick in the head, including me. I have myself not fully healed from this. I'm in the process of recovery from the mental illness called denial. And most people are not even at the denial stage. The denial stage I view as kind of the first step to recovery. This is the step you have to come out of to get to acceptance. So denial is the other side of the coin of acceptance. Most people are not in that stage, the stage that precedes recovery. And the reason they're not in that stage is because people aren't telling their parents and their children and their loved ones, hey, there's a problem, you're fucked up. You're hurting yourself, you're hurting me, you're hurting others. No one even brought that idea up to them. Because when you have to bring that idea up to the addict, and they're going to shake their head and say, no, I'm not fucked up, I'm not, you know. And this is the point of this presentation. That's what I do. I bring the truth up and throw it into people's face. So now the listener you've already begun the process of recovery, whether you know it or not. Because you're either going to deny or you're going to accept. And it'll be up to you to take the steps to exit the denial stage in all the different aspects of life. I'm not telling you to do anything I wouldn't do. There's aspects of my life where I have to face the truth too, where I have to see if I'm not being in the state of denial, and it's up to you to do that on your own time. And I can't make you go through that process, just like nobody could have made it happen for me. So many people tried to break me out of that mind state, who I was, and they had zero chance it would not happen. You know, they would basically have to kill me to do that, and that's what it is. You have to make your own choice to come out of that. And unfortunately, many of us are not even at the stage of denial yet, because there's a stage before denial that is actually worse than denial. And the stage that is actually worse than denial is the full stage of foolishness. When faced with reality, the mind chooses denial or acceptance. A person can avoid that choice only if the reality is never presented to them. And that's where humanity currently is. Humanity is in a stage of foolishness because reality is not being presented to them harshly, loudly, and clearly enough. So the stage of foolishness ends either when the crime is exposed, when they figure it out, or when the criminal's mission is complete. That's the only way you get out of the full stage. And I'll talk about this fool card right here. The fool has, basically he has no shoes. He doesn't have the right shoes for the job. He's in a state of ignorance. He feels like he's invincible. Nothing can hurt him. You could see him right here. He's packed lightly. He's heading on a journey, but he's unprepared for the journey. You see the dog over there trying to warn him, but he's just sitting there in his bliss, walking around, basking in his glory with the little flower, unprepared for the job, about to walk off of a cliff. Now, I'm well aware of the positive. There's a very positive and noble aspect to this card. I'm not talking about that. I'm not saying this is a totally negative card. I'm not going to like discount the esoteric aspect of the Fool card, but in a negative sense, in this negative aspect of the card, this is where we are as a species. We're in the Fool stage, and a few words, when you're fooled, that's what happens when a criminal has their way with you. You got fooled, you know, you played, taken, ripped off, finessed, taken for a fool when you get taken for a fool. And the Fool is the card that inspires the Joker card in the normal card deck. And when you say you've been jacked, that's when you've been stolen from. You've been like a carjacking or something like that is when somebody takes your property. You've been jacked. That's what the Joker is. It's the jack right there. Vic, Trick, Mark. This is where we are right now. We're in a complete state of victimhood, where the criminals completely just have their way with us. You know. This is where humanity is, the victimhood stage. So we've talked about what mentality, what creates the victim mentality. Now let's talk about what creates the criminal. The origin of crime is solipsism, which is the false claim to the right of ignorance. But let me read the definition. This is also from Marx, Streetwise Spirituality. Solipsism is the ideology that only one's own mind is sure to exist. Solipsists contend that knowledge of anything outside one's own mind is unsure. Hence there is no such thing as objective truth, and nothing about the external world and its workings can actually be known or communicated to others. That's the definition of solipsism. And it's the condition that precipitates ignorance and denial. This is like where before you get to this is what makes the full stage happen. This is what makes the denial stage happen. Solipsism basically says there's no such thing as right. And I know most people would not claim to be this, right? There is, I think, a very few people who would just admit that they are solipsists. But I contend in my presentation here that this is a lot more common than people think. And what solipsism ultimately comes down to is it's the ideology of separation. And this is the reason I became a criminal. Like, I knew that there's a basic moral code, and that violence and deception and indulgence would create destruction. I knew this, like, that being a criminal is not the right thing to do. I knew that the world would be a net worse place if I acted selfishly and unfairly, but I didn't care, right? The way I saw it was, when I was doing what I'm doing, is none of this applies to me. I'm different, right? The rules apply to, but they don't have to apply to me because I'm me, right? So I used to think this way while I was a criminal, and I thought that I was just like a narcissist bordering on a sociopath. But now, having completely come out of that mindset, I realized that I was just actually a Satanist and a de facto solipsist. De facto solipsism means you wouldn't describe yourself as one, but your actions are basically showing that. So if you came up to somebody and said, do you believe that there is no such thing as truth and only you exist, I think very few people would admit to that. So that's why people don't realize how important this is, how big of an issue solipsism is. But this is basically what many people are in a state of. And I would have, of course, never admitted or described myself as a solipsist. If you asked me 5 years ago if there's such thing as objective truth, I'd say of course. Even universal moral laws, I'd say yeah. And I was pretty knowledgeable about those things even then. But in my behavior, in my actions, I was a solipsist. Basically, rules for thee and none for me. That's what it is. And I really did think that deep down, you know, when it comes down to it, I'm the only one really here. So I gotta look out for me. And that's what the criminals do, you know. And on some level, this is the ideology that creates a criminal. Because how else could somebody be capable of harming innocent people, right? Unless they think that their victim is something separate from them. Not being awake to the fact that we are all connected. We are one part of one being. You know, if they think it's someone separate, not somebody's mom or somebody's son or somebody's brother, you know, somebody just like them. Solipsism is the endpoint that you arrive at if you're trying to philosophically actually justify your actions. If you're trying to explain yourself away, solipsism is your endpoint you're going to arrive at if you want to escape the truth regarding your behavior on the plane of philosophy. Meaning, yeah, you could deny it, you could ignore it, you could run from it, but if you wanted to actually logically justify it, that what you're doing as a criminal and as a person who hurts other people is okay, solipsism is going to be your answer. And solipsism is lone wolf Satanism. And Satanists actually regard it as a sin, because in that mental state of solipsism, you are of no use even to them, even to a hierarchy of criminals and psychopaths. You are no use as a solipsist, even to a fraternity of them. One of my main contentions in this presentation is, this condition is a lot more common than people think, and I'm going to prove it. I talked about how the former me had this ideology and turned me into a criminal, right? Well, what about the rest of us? When we are shown that the crime and injustice is going on in this world, and somebody says, you know, somebody else, help me, you have to help me, this guy's attacking me, you know, you gotta help me, call for help. And the person says, you say, well, why me? I don't want to do anything. Why should I have to help you? That you know you're getting your purse stolen. Why do I have to go call for help and stop him? You know, the person says, no, say something, you have to help me, and you just say nothing. So if you're in that state, you're next door to where I was already. You're already down the street from me, the criminal, because you can't see yourself in the victim either. It's the same condition, right? We're getting at the origin of crime here, you know. But let's talk about solipsism in a classical sense, like the belief that there is no such thing as truth, that classic philosophical position. You know, we're on this deep dive into the abyss of the sickness of the mind, so let's go all the way. Where does crime even come from? Where does this inner disease of chronic ignorance and denial come from? What is the root of all evil? I used to have this notebook. When I was just getting into esoteric knowledge, I write down what's the root of all evil, and I came up with the answer: ignorance. And a couple years ago, I would have been fine with that answer. That ignorance is the root of all evil. You know, that makes sense. But one word can be misinterpreted, and the best way to define the actual cause of all evil behavior and evil actions is this: it's the belief that truth is not knowable. And that's basically solipsism. What creates all evil is that it's not even denying truth. It's this state where it is what it is. There is no such thing as truth, and therefore it doesn't affect me. That's what's claimed. And I know that comes across as abstract, right? But we're not going to do any woo-woo. We're going to take it back to the street level. What allows crime to go on in families, you know, in the ghetto, child beating in the homes? What allows rape to go on by family members? It has to be solipsism. It has to be that somewhere in the mind, somebody thinks that this is the way it can be. It's accepting total inversion as being even possible, as being possible as a natural state, which it isn't. And no one says no. No one throws it in their face. No one tells them, hey, you're sick and I will not go along with this alive. Right? No one says that to them. No one says, I know what you do. No, the words, I know the truth, are the beginning of the end of all violence and abuse. Evil dies with those words. Those words, I know the truth. Because that forces a wrongdoer to either stop what they're doing or admit that what they do is wrong. And if they know they are doing wrong, then they will actually self-destruct pretty quickly, you know. Nature has like it's very intelligently constructed so that if somebody knows they're a wrongdoer and they're a piece of shit, they actually will find it difficult to form a relationship with a partner and then have children and then pass on that satanic, psychopathic mindset to the next generation. It actually gets to be pretty self-destructive. This is how it is to be a criminal. You know, most of us are pretty self-destructive. That's why there's not too many criminals making presentations like this. But you know, not to get too philosophical, wrong can only be done if somebody thinks it's right. Nobody's actually going to do wrong consciously, not for very long. Because if we don't know what's right, we can at least find out, right? If we're wrong about that, someone who is right will tell us, you know? And the cause of all the world's problems is not that. It's not that. The cause of the world's problems is that people claim in their heads that there's no such thing as being right, so I can't be wrong. It's the fact, like, you don't want to play, you don't want to play with somebody, and you won't, because you won't lose to them. You'll be able to say, I never lost to you, but you never played. You never got in the cage, you never got on the court, you never got on the field, and it's all because you don't want to lose, you don't want to be wrong. So then you claim that there's no such thing as being right, and it's all perception, and it's all what's good for me. That's solipsism. Somebody tells me there is such a thing as truth, but you don't have that right now. Well, there's a way out of that by having a conversation and coming to a synthesis, right? Presenting knowledge and facts and coming to a conclusion. In the same way, there's always a way for the drug addict to come out of denial. Even if he chooses denial over and over again, he's going to have all kinds of lessons and painful truths come up in his life, thrown in his face, until it can no longer be ignored. So even by resisting truth and fighting against it, healing is actually possible. Because that you will come to a synthesis by those two polarities working against each other. So, like, if you claim I'm wrong about something, I can work with that. Because I've spent most of my life learning about principles and philosophy instead of having a normal life. So if somebody thinks they have the truth and I don't, we can philosophically put the gloves on, go at it, and see who's right. And if you kick my ass, then I'll admit that you have the truth in hand and I don't. And then I will have to adjust my point of view and my perspective and worldview to align with that, truth. And I don't say this stuff because I'm pretty sure, I say this stuff because I know. And those who are willing to exchange punches in that philosophical sense, to put their record on the line when it comes to learning life, they're already on the path to recovery. Yeah? But the people who aren't, what allows sickness and depravity to go on, to grow in this world, is the position of, I'm not going to lose to you because there's nothing to fight over when it comes to the truth. There is no truth to fight for. And that's the belief that the truth cannot be known, and therefore there's nothing to fight for, there's nothing to argue about, there's nothing to stand up for. That's solipsism, and it's everywhere. It's not fringe ideology, it's a dominant ideology. Taking it back to the presentation, why don't people agree that the world is run by criminals? They deny the global occult conspiracy, they deny that government is slavery, that they deny that the human history is slavery. The answer is that they are naive and in denial. But what puts you in that state of denial is that you don't want what I'm saying to be true, right? You don't want to be wrong. So you convince yourself that there's no way you can be wrong if nobody can be right. That there's no way somebody else can know the truth if you don't. And that's the problem before the problem. That's the original problem. And the truth will not reach those people. If you're in that's why the Satanists don't take solipsis. Because you can't teach them anything in that state. They're closed off. They're going to continue to hurt themselves and continue to hurt others. And there's nothing I, or anyone else, or even the Creator himself can do about it. Because that's free will. So, but for the rest of those that have at least the courage to deny, to engage in conversation, engage in thought, and resist something if there is something to resist, let me talk about the victim's first response to a criminal, and that's not self-defense. The first response to crime is denial. People don't like to admit that they've been the victim of a crime. You know, there's some sort of shame that comes along with being tricked and fooled and being the victim of being scammed. And the evidence of this is widespread, you know. You could look up some stories of people that have been victims of the recent, like, crypto scams and Ponzi schemes that are making reemergence. Get-rich-quick schemes, you know, fake gurus, crypto scams. There's infinite stories on YouTube of people talking about this, and in all of those stories there was a long period of denial and suffering before these people could actually accept the fact that they were tricked out of their money. And it's manipulation, kind of like the pimp does, but the scammer makes it seem like if you're not profiting from what they're offering, it's because there's something wrong with you. So you lost your money, well, you probably did it wrong. That's what they say, the scammer. And the other people being scammed will actually reinforce this, unfortunately, even if they're losing their money too. So everybody's getting robbed, everybody's losing their money, but nobody wants that shame of you know, having to look in front of people and say, I got played, or like it's not working for me, or I'm poor. People are ashamed to say that. They have this tendency to pretend that everything's okay, you know, just to be left alone. And that makes the criminal and psychopath's job infinitely easier. They don't need any duct tape or zip ties. They have a willing victim, you know? But psychopaths don't have shame, so that's why they use it. They will lie and act brazenly and strongly and willfully and take great risks because they don't have the same sense of shame that you and I have. And I know that shame seems like a real negative emotion. It's actually one of the lowest frequency emotions. You know, you could feel it like all the way. The emotion of shame, you could feel it all the way like below your stomach. It's a very low, terrible emotion to feel. But shame is a brilliant thing because it's the emotion that discourages actions that are against morality, dignity, and decency. It discourages those actions. And we struggle with it, you know, we try to avoid it at all costs. But when its lessons are accepted, shame is one of emotion's most powerful teachers. Unfortunately for us, we collapse under its weight. We can't handle those lessons. That's why most sexual assaults go unreported, right? And that's a very unfortunate and sad effect. The victims of sexual violence feel shame because of that violation of what is so flagrant, that their decency and dignity being taken is so severe and wrong that there's a shame felt just by being a victim of that. It ties you in with the abuser. That's why it is such a flagrant and disgusting crime. And because of shame, many scams, especially in the current, you know, crypto and NFT social media environment, they go unreported. They sell us buying all the excuses that we deep down want to believe. And that's how petty criminals never run out of victims, because there's always a sucker. There's always a sucker out there, a willing victim. People want to believe they can get $1,000 item for 20. That dreaming mentality will always create a willing victim. And even theft goes unchallenged due to shame. And this happened to me. So I had a story a couple years ago. This is a story about what happened a couple years ago. I was pulling up, waiting to buy some kind of, I don't know if it was weed or some kind of drugs, just like regular stuff. But it was from somebody I don't know, and we were already, you know, kind of just partying, had a car of 3 people waiting for some person, don't really know them, don't know how I know them. I put myself in those situations a lot because most of the time you just, you know, you weren't really, I wasn't really afraid of things happening because I'm usually either armed or, you know, willing to, I was pretty confident in my ability to defend myself even without weapons. But anyway, we're sitting there for like about an hour, drinking, smoking, and just waiting for the transaction to happen, kind of, not really nothing crazy. And then I'm waiting for somebody to come out, and the handoff's supposed to happen. I give them the money, and then they just kind of like, it seemed like they ran off. I was in the car, so they came up to the window, they were like looking out, and then they kind of just like run away, but they didn't really run away, it was just like a quick movement. Now I was a little bit high at the time, but no, I was still lucid. And I was with 3 other people, and we didn't know if he's gonna come back with the product, or if we just got robbed, because it didn't seem like we just got robbed. You know, you give somebody the money and he's about to hand something off to you, but he goes and it goes right back. If you're buying from people you don't know, this kind of happens and you just kind of have to make the handoff. Like, if you're buying drugs on the west side of Chicago, where like the real criminals are, the real gangs are, sometimes you are going to give your money up first, and there's a trust factor where they will give you your stuff. And the reason why over on the west side it usually goes off without a robbery is because that there's an unspoken code that you don't mess with the customers, you know. So they actually usually will not. I've never heard of somebody getting robbed out there who's an outsider, like a white person. If you're going to the west side of Chicago, even though somebody else would get robbed and get their money taken, you'll be taken care of because they basically don't want to scare off their customer base. There's kind of an unwritten code over there that you don't touch the outside customers, because they're the ones who bring the money into the community. But anyway, in this situation with the 3 people I was with, I was looking at them and I was like, did we just get robbed? You know, not really knowing. And they're like, no, I think he's gonna be back with the product. And it just seems so funny when I think about it now, but like, this happened to me and I wasn't really a sucker. Like, I was somebody who was doing this stuff. I was robbing other people. But just the way that it happened, this is the dynamic of shame. This is where you don't want to accept what happened to you, even though it just happened to you. And then, you know, I waited there for about like 15 minutes and realized I just got robbed, so I came out there, you know, waving my little... I actually had a fake gun at the time, which is essentially a BB gun, but you know, this is it. As a criminal, you do a lot of serious things, but you do a lot of dumb, childish things. And that's why people don't talk about it, because it really is a state of childness, being a kid. So this happened to me. This tendency to deny being the victim of a crime. And scammers especially make their living off of this, by weaponizing the emotion of shame against the victim. Okay? And talking about scams, let's talk about scams. What are some scams that nobody thinks are scams? So, retirement for one, because the amount you pay that goes towards Social Security or a different retirement program is based on a set cash amount that you will pay now in return, and you will receive it in the future. Okay? By the time you get to receiving that money, if you ever do, it's worth much less than it was when you were putting the money in. It's going to be worth a lot less. That cash is going to be worth less than the cash that you got taken out of your paycheck, even if it was an equal amount, right? So, and that's assuming that that government is still around by the time you retire and chooses to honor those payments. And that's a big if, right? We don't know that. And that's assuming you don't die before that time. And the life expectancy is going down right now. Life expectancy has dropped 4 out of the past 7 years. You know, and the government now will pay you actually more money if you wait to choose to withdraw your payments until you're 70. Why do they do that? Because government assistance programs play the odds, just like casinos. And the casinos and lottery are a scam as well. Look at those other scams. I may have put the ballot in there because voting is a scam as well. A lot of people don't want to admit that, you know. That's an outright scam. Voting is an obvious one. Scam. And it doesn't matter if you win at the casino, it's still a scam, right? So I know people win at the casino regularly. People win at the lottery sometimes. It's still a scam. It's a systematic scheme of taking money. And it's also related to drugs, because it sells the drug of winning. It's not just about the money that people want to win from the lottery. Yeah, that's part of it, of being nothing one day and having everything the next day without any work. But people want to be the one to win. They want the feeling of being the one to win. It's like a universe. It's like the universe approving of you and validating you, right? They wish they could one day just wake up to a different life without doing any of the work to warrant living a different life. And that's the same reason people send money over to the Nigerian prince, the lonely girl in Bulgaria that wants to meet you, fly over and meet you. All these are scams. So do not trust the government with your money. It's gambling. If gambling and the lottery institutions and life insurance, you know, just insurance institutions in general, weren't a scam, they wouldn't exist as an institution, because they wouldn't be making any money. You know, they would have to put in some of their own money, but it's a systematic transfer from us to them, not two-way around. It doesn't matter if you get an insurance payment. It's a scam. The tables are tilted, okay? If they didn't do those scams, they would actually have to work for their money like you and I do. Scammers make money because of their victims' tendency to bet against themselves. That's what they do. I talked about the numbers racket, and scams are very similar to racketeering, right? One of the main characteristics they have in common is It's based on the victim's get-rich-quick dream for a better life, that desire. However, in this section about scams, it's about like the very simple, blatant financial schemes where the odds are unfavorable, right? Retirement funds, savings accounts. You know, in savings accounts, you're offered some tiny, microscopic, minuscule percentage of an increase over time. And people buy into this because of the legitimacy of banks, the success and status symbol of this. But I'm not even going to go into how the banks use up that investment and then that you put into your account, and then they lend it as at a percentage, or they make a bigger percentage than they give you. Let's just bypass that and talk about the real world value of the cash. It's the same amount of cash on a screen, but by the time you take it out, it's worth less because of inflation. That's why it's a scam inherently, these savings accounts. People think they're actually saving money with savings accounts. I don't know where people get this. You know, the fact that there are so many credit unions and banks shows that their customers are losing money. You know, they're a business just like the steakhouse next to the bank. They make their money too. The steakhouse doesn't pay you. They give you the food in exchange for the money. They're just taking money. The banks are taking money from you. They're not a mediator of money where they will take it from you and then give it back to you. They're taking it. They're takers, right? Scammers. It's just like the odds of betting on sports games, right? The odds makers, just because you could win a sports bet doesn't mean it's fair in any way. It's a systematic transfer from the suckers to the criminals, to the scammers. And that's why they have so much cash to advertise so aggressively. You know how many sports betting ads I see? And I barely watch TV. On YouTube, clearly they're making some money. And the customers are losing. Since all their profits are direct transfers of money from the people that use them, in the hope and idea that they will actually use some money. So what I'm saying is they don't sell a product like the steakhouse does. All of their money comes from a direct one-to-one transfer of people who actually think that that's going to make them more money. But they're making all the money. So how is it not a scam, Street level scammers could get you with the word magic or a wild story. That's how it happens on the street. You'll have a guy talking about a crazy story, a story about their family member, this and that, hoping that you'll emotionally invest into it and then give you the money. Or they could have a well-developed deceptive operation on the street level. But the truth is, most scammers are just advertising. Like the scamming I still see from knowing certain people being, I'm not tied into the criminal world, but I kind of see what they're doing. Most scammers nowadays just advertise on Snapchat or in chat rooms, Instagram, in your inbox, like, hit me up if you want to double $1,000. And what this used to be called card cracking, or just what it is check scams. Basically, you'll send them money and then they will basically will cash it twice, or it's basically just doing credit fraud or bank fraud, right? Basic ATM cash fraud on that kind of a level, which you will go to jail for pretty easily. The people are trying to do this, but it does make a lot of money. This is operating, and their job has never been easier, actually, because people are so money obsessed, and they just have to set the bait and wait and watch the water. And the people will transfer that $1,000 over to see it double, and sometimes it doubles, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes they'll just take your money, Sometimes they'll make the money and then they'll never give it to you. They'll triple profit, At some point when we're talking about this, when do we just call a scam straight up theft? Because that's what it is. Technically the people give their money up willingly, but so does a person paying off a ransom or a crooked lawyer. With that level of deception involved, that crime is just straight up stealing. It's petty theft, and that's what taxes are. I don't want to spend too much time on this because it's been done many times, but taxation is theft, right? It's your money. It's just like I don't have to pay a tax on I don't have to pay a ticket being parked outside my house. By living in this house, I only have to pay for what I use here. You can't pay based on what you made, the profit you made, you know. So taxation is theft, it's just stealing. It's one of the most blatant forms of stealing. It's an evidence that we're living in feudalism and slavery. But I won't spend too much time on that because you could look it up. Taxation is theft, taxes are theft, okay? So, where are we at? We talked about criminal conspiracy, racketeering, extortion, coercion, harassment, deception, pimping, drug dealing, scamming, and theft. That is just the crimes that the government is engaged in. That's a lot of crime. You'll go down for a lot of years for committing these crimes, and they do this in a babyface fashion. And at this point, we've touched on basically every kind of crime you could think of, other than rape and murder. And right, the government is involved in those on multiple levels, engaged in those behaviors. Afghanistan, Iraq, Vietnam, invasions of people and their nations without their consent and taking of their resources. Invading people and taking what they have, their resources, that in itself is the definition of rape, right? Overnight, their way of life disappears, and those things will never go back to the way they were. That's murder in itself. That's killing potential, that's killing their former life. So no wonder what follows is the physical rape and murder of those people, because that's what happens when you have invasions of other countries. I got a picture up here of one of the American invasions of the Middle East, and I've got a picture of the massacre in Voin, which a lot of murder and rape took place, not even by the military, but it's the spirit of the actions that the military does. It's the action of a mob orgy of violence. So when you take into and you want to take something that they have, when you work yourself up into that state to go into somebody's house and take everything from them, what's going to follow is actual rape and murder, because it is just submission to that ultimate destructive, consumptive, consuming force. There will be countless justifications and reasons and excuses and long-winded explanations for this rape and murder. There were explanations for Beirut, Kuwait, Korea, Serbia, Bosnia, Haiti. I'm just talking about American invasions. Americans invading other nations. Some jurisdictions hold more weight than others, but in most cases the justification is. Some justifications hold more weight than others, excuse me. The justification is, we need to carry out this rape and murder to stop this other group from carrying out this rape and murder. And that's what it basically is. And if that wasn't enough, back at home, if you don't do what they say, if you don't comply with the criminals that operate under the police departments, you can be murdered in the street. Have we not seen enough of this lately? Man, thank God for body cams, right? Or you'll be taken to jail to be raped and murdered there, because that's what it is in jail. Not only the rape goes on, when you die in jail, you've been murdered, actually. There are no natural deaths in jail. There are murders, right? Because they're crimes, because they initiate harm to others. Now, some of those people have initiated harm to others, probably most of them, but that does not change the fact that imprisonment is immoral in itself, and I'll talk about that. And it doesn't matter how many good cops or good soldiers there are. You know a good cop or a good soldier, military service member, boo fucking who. This is the way it is. There's too many genocides for me to placate to your sensibilities, sensitive sensibilities, like Mark Passio says. You know, if you protect one murder, you're aiding and abetting murder. That's the way it is. And that's how it is where I live. If I were an accomplice to a crime, I'm going to get charged with that crime. That's how it is in Cook County. That's how it is on the street. That's how it is in the legal system as well. So, but look, I will be the first to admit there are members of the military who are decent people in the conventional sense of the word. Like I know when I talk to them, they conduct themselves in an upright way, and someone who is from the military, usually when I have an interaction with them, you can trust them, and in peacetime they will abide by some kind of moral code. So they're not the worst people in that sense. I'm not saying they're ultimately 100% bad people in totality. They're for the most part upstanding people that to the average person on the street, you know. The problem is the military never disobeys orders. If you've ever heard of the military disobeying orders, you've stumbled upon like a 1 in 1 million exception. It doesn't happen. It's a negligible percentage. And people always think their country is different. I'm Polish. I know the Polish people will think, yeah, but I know the American army's bad, but our people, they wouldn't do that. Polish people really think that the Polish army would never kill women and children. Americans think the U.S. Army would never put people in concentration camps, etc., but this always happens. It always happens. And as a nation becomes more totalitarian, like the United States of course is, the aggregate moral standing and general decency of an armed force decreases. And you can see this. The people in the army today that are going out into combat today, they're not the same type of moral character that you would get from a World War II veteran, and you could see this for yourself. Look up interviews on YouTube. You know, the soldiers that stormed Normandy are a different breed than the soldiers today, preparing to carry out an offensive, unjustified assaults on third world countries. You know, test that for yourself. You know, they are a much higher character, those former soldiers, than the military members today. For the most part, people join the military today for money or other completely selfish reasons. You know, completely lacking conscience or awareness. They don't even have the awareness to hold a sword or a drill. You know, let alone operate machine guns and tanks. They shouldn't be allowed to use a screwdriver. People who are willing to completely abdicate their personal responsibility to go follow orders to bomb third world countries. You know, in the streets of Chicago, which is super depraved and crazy, there's not even an equivalent to this. You know, the killings that happen, there's not an equivalent to something like the military or police. The rampant killings that happen here are all personal. They're like gang retaliations. You know, even when women and children are killed, it's not because an order was passed down by a gang boss. It's because the opposition side mocked their dead family members. It's all like actually family disrespect and interactions. Modern gang violence, at least in Chicago. I know contract killers surely are out there. You know, there are. That gang structure is still there, especially in the different parts of the world, but this is largely a thing of the past. Because the gang structure in Chicago has collapsed a long time ago. And the day cannot come soon enough where, just like the urban black gang culture collapse, the black gang structure collapse in Chicago, the legalized gang structure collapses. I'm talking about the police and military. Oh man, it'll be a glorious day. And you know, the world would be a much better place that if Larry Hoover, the founder and former leader of the Gangster Disciples, the main gang leader in Chicago, switched places with whoever was the commander-in-chief at the time. So when Larry Hoover was locked up, who was the president of the United States? Oh, it was Richard Nixon. Oh, I bet you it would be a better place if Larry Hoover was free and Richard Nixon was locked up. You would have saved a lot of suffering, actually. Larry Hoover would not in 100 lifetimes have done as much damage as Richard Nixon did. While Larry Hoover may have ordered a couple murders, may have committed a couple murders, Nixon's orders killed over 11,000 people in Cambodia. People don't remember. People don't even know that happened, that there was an invasion of Cambodia. Why the fuck did the U.S. have to invade Cambodia? You know? Ridiculous. And that reminds me, there's one crime I missed, since I'm speaking about it like this. Right, saying, you know, Richard Nixon's a murderer and the police officers are rapists and murderers and the military are rapists and murderers. By saying that about members of the police and armed forces being rapists and murderers, I'm putting myself at risk of being the victim of another crime that I missed. Kidnapping. Kidnapping, which is being abducted from your physical location, deprived of your freedom of movement, and being taken to a location of the kidnapper's choosing. You may know that as arrest, but it's kidnapping. And that's what will happen if I were to be arrested for only speaking, for only making a presentation like this. Because no crime has been committed here. There's no defamation going on here. It's the truth. It's not defamation, it's not libel, it's not slander, it's not harassment or anything like that. I'm not sending anybody to anybody's house. It's the truth of the institution that the people are involved in. The planet called Earth has always been controlled by criminals, and the institutions of this world allow those criminals to function, for them to perpetuate their crimes in broad daylight. And this is the solution that we come up in modern day to our problems. Kidnapping. You know, how childish and immature. People will say, but Conrad, we can't have predators and killers living freely and walking among us. I agree. But where they lose me is where you say that we have to create an armed human cleanup crew that can't be held liable for their actions. Can't be held liable for their actions. That's what the police is. You've created now a niche for the predators and killers to carry out their violence, not only undetected, but protected and respected. That's what you can do. If you want to be a criminal, you just have to join the police, because then you'll be protected by the blue code of silence and the thin blue line, which people think is such a good idea to put on the American flag. Put a blue line on a flag about the institution of police is just about, I can't think of a better reason to burn a flag. So that's you doing that. You guys that are doing that, that are putting the fuck Joe Biden sticker by the American flag with the blue line on it, that blue line, you're basically burning the American flag that has a blue line on it would be an act of respect towards America, if you think about it. So if only a violent criminal has the will and patience to complete a bit of training that is ever decreasing in standards, because not only are cops lacking intelligence as it is, cops are not very intelligent people, just talk to them, they're not very smart. You have ever decreasing standards for what it takes to be a cop. Because why? Not only have you had the recent killings of unarmed black men, you've had those videos coming out. So people are losing a bit of respect for police, finally. They're losing a bit of respect, but they need more cops on the streets. So they're going to just decrease their standards of what it takes to be a cop. Just like the military moral character is decreasing of the average military member. Just how conscious average cop is decreasing rapidly. And fewer people want to be cops because they're seeing they're not as respected anymore. You know, this is coming out just from body cams, just from seeing what they do, you know, due to the way police brutality has become high profile, you know, and societal respect for police has slightly decreased. It's decreased a little bit, it's still way too high. You know, if a person like that, say you were a psychopath and you wanted to find a way to be able to carry out your fantasies on innocent people, if they only complete the academy and basic training, they could prey on the people under the protection of the law and the street code of silence that cops adhere to when it comes to protecting their fellow gang members. So to arrive at that, from the conclusion of we can't have evildoers walking among us freely, which I agree with, but that's quite the leap to create a predator class, an untouchable predator class, to combat that. The conventional reasoning there goes wrong on so many levels, and I'll go through them in no particular order. 1. The method of detection of a person being unfit to live in society would have to be objective, not reliant on arbitrary decisions made by a judge or jury, and therefore dependent on the rhetorical skills of the legal teams. Right? I'll go through this after I read it. It is illogical to designate a group of individuals to have a right to perform an action that individuals outside of the group do not have. Otherwise, a given action could be an arrest at 2:59 and kidnapping at 3:01. That could not logically, that could not be true in reality. There has to be denial involved for that to be true. And 3, all persons are presumed innocent until proven guilty. Therefore, all arrests have been arrests of innocent people, right? Because if the determination of guilt occurs when the crime takes place, right? Therefore, the only person that could prove guilt is the victim, and a settlement of that claim between the victim and the person being accused of the crime. Therefore, there is no such thing as a victimless crime. Yet, about 1/3 of current prisoners are in prison for victimless crimes. So those people are being kidnapped and murdered for sure. Because there's no such thing as a victimless crime. Prostitution, drug dealing, these things do not have a victim. So they're not crimes. Like drug possession. And imprisonment is not a form of justice, it's a form of torture. Okay? Imprisonment. Jailing someone does not administer justice to the evildoer. Self-defense does that. But imprisonment, what it does is it torments the remnants of the good person that person formerly had. Because nobody's 100% criminal. Me, when I was a criminal, I was not 100% evil. I was a percentage evil, a percentage bad person, but I also had a percentage within me that was a son, a brother, a person that did good things for people, right? So when you imprison somebody, you're not punishing the bad part, you're punishing the good part and corrupting the person entirely to completion. It torments the remnants of the good that person had or has or used to have within them. Okay, so I added this slide relatively recently just to clarify those 4 points of how we currently deal with criminality by kidnapping, and give the correct solution under natural law. So we'll give the solutions. First, you have a group of people is given the power to arrest, which is a crime for anyone outside of the group. And no one gets the right to decide what's right and wrong. Man's law cannot determine if someone is unfit to walk among us. This can only be done under God's law, through determining whether harm was initiated or not. Just like chemistry and physics, laws of human behavior are a science, and the microscope detects through the following inquiry: was harm done? Who initiated it? Therefore, rights were violated, and the violator is guilty under natural law. Right? This is a science. The correct way is according with the science, to establish accurately according to the science and come to the right conclusion based on the science. Follow the science. The second one, no one gets the right to commit crimes. A group of people is given the power to arrest, which is a crime for anyone outside of the group. So I can't arrest a cop, but a cop can arrest me. The administering of justice cannot be reserved for a given group or profession. Under natural law, it is reserved for the victim under the self-defense principle, which is natural law's agent of equilibrium. It is the equalizer. And while self-defense does include defending or even avenging a family member, or even general community defense, the issue of bounty hunters is a contested one. So I'm going to explore this because this is, even in the natural law community, this is one of the few things, the little things that you can maybe argue about. This is like a science that has not been so firmly established yet. And the reason I'm going to point this out is not to downplay the perfect elegance of natural law. It's such an amazing, simple law. And I'm not pushing it to its boundaries to downplay it or attack it or diminish it. I'm doing it specifically to point out how elegant and simple it is, and how we need to keep pushing the boundaries of it to get it down to such a science that this is common knowledge to everyone. So what was I talking about is the issue of bounty hunters. You know, because if harm was done to you, then you could defend yourself. But if it was done to like your son or daughter, can you then employ somebody's actions to basically kill that person in self-defense because they harmed your family member? So my personal take on this is that it is immoral to accept payment for assisting in self-defense. Now, this is going outside the topic just a little bit, but this is a great opportunity to analyze this. I personally think, and this is based on my research and deep contemplation, that while I wholeheartedly agree with removing evildoers, an action like that would have to be a labor of love, done on a volunteer basis, and accepting no personal gain for it. not even a personal gift or donation. So I'm saying that if you were to be somebody who's going to now fight and kill in somebody else's self-defense, it would be immoral to accept payment for it. You should only do it out of love. That's the only action that can motivate. There's the only emotion that can motivate that action. A person other than the victim can cause harm to an offender only motivated by love and nothing else. And since we do not yet have the technology and instrumentation to measure and quantify love, which is possible, we just don't have it yet, right? This is a science. We just have not mastered the science yet. That does not matter. That does not mean that it doesn't exist. Since we don't have that technology and instrumentation, this is an area of the science of natural law with the tiniest bit of gray area. And I mentioned this not to cast a shadow or undermine natural law, but to show that just like in quantum physics, the laws of nature seem to toy with us as we push its boundaries. And this exercise in attempting to give an uninvolved third party, like bounty hunters, the power to dish out justice is a dangerous, slippery slope, even if they were not a gang of order followers who serve a cult of psychopaths. That's what the police are, a gang of order followers serving a cult of psychopaths. What I'm saying is, if somebody can accept money to dish out justice, you're basically creating the wiggle room for an institution like the police, which need to be taken down immediately. The third, since all are innocent until proven guilty, arrest is an action that happens to innocent people only. So no one gets the right to decide guilt or innocence. Ascertaining or proving guilt is also well defined under natural law. It does not require kidnapping under a presumption of crime followed by a formal accusation called a charge. Under natural law, the victim makes the claim that their rights have been violated. It happens on the spot. The accuser and the accused, being the directly involved parties, have the responsibility to resolve that claim between each other. Okay? That's how it happens under natural law. And after the accused has an opportunity to defend himself, then witnesses or third parties may become involved in determining whether the self-defense principle should be exercised, right? But again, here, the potential for mob violence becomes problematic. Because, say, a woman accuses somebody of rape, and people want to defend her, and now somebody that did not perform that action, that woman would be performing an immoral action under natural law, but nobody would be knowing that she's lying if she was. And then you got the potential for mob violence and mob justice, like you have a lot in different parts of the world. And that's why you have public executions for people being burned with a car tire around them. That's problematic, you know? And as any person harming another based on a false claim would be committing a crime under natural law. This again highlights the slippery slope and danger that exists if violence is not addressed immediately. The thing the way we can help natural law and help ourselves to understand it, it would be so elegant and so obvious, is if we always addressed violence immediately. Then there is no gray area at all. Justice under natural law should be delivered as soon as possible. While natural law is unchanged by time, we are. Time changes us, and how we are judged under natural law, therefore. For example, one who is silent regarding abuse is a victim today, but one who is silent regarding abuse for 10 years becomes complicit in the evil. So if you're a child that was abused and hit by an alcoholic father, and you're 18 now, or you're 16 now, and you are basically taking care of your younger brother, but at a certain point, even though you are still being a victim of violence, you're complicit in the violence. And that's why time matters. That's why time matters for us. That's why if somebody takes $10 from you today, you could call him out, and you could hit him in the face, you could cut his hand off today because he took your property. Today, if you come to him in 10 years and he's having dinner with his family and take self-defense action based on that harm, do you really have the right to do it? It becomes, how does that person know that they're being punished for something that they did? It's just like with imprisonment, right? The person that committed a crime 20 years ago, at a certain point, does he even remember why he's there? He only remembers the injustice that just happens to him today. That's why time matters. That's why it matters to speak up against injustice. And the fourth, imprisonment is an accepted form of justice. This is what we believe, and this is wrong, because it's torture, and no one has the right to decide an adequate level of torture. There is no such thing. The element of time is what makes the act of imprisonment immoral. If a person is not fit to walk among us in society, and I agree that there are people who are not fit to walk among us in society, but if you're not fit to walk among the others in society, then you're not fit to live. Okay? Either we can coexist with someone, or they should not exist. That's how I see it. And as an alternative to being put to death, which, unlike imprisonment, is a suitable punishment for crimes against natural law, an offender could be ostracized from society, allowed to leave and pursue life as he will. And basically he could have a deferred death sentence. That sentence, as we say in Chicago, that sentence would be on site. Meaning, you did something that is terrible, you committed rape, or you did something. You cannot stay here, but they do not necessarily have to kill him. He just has to stay out of anybody's eyesight. But if he is seen, that sentence will be exercised, and that will be that person's choice. So that's some real hardcore natural law stuff right there, and that's the truth, I hope if you've made it this far, you've made it to some real philosophical gold over here, And that's why I wanted to dedicate this presentation to Mark, because this is such deep transformational knowledge in my personal life. What I came up out of, death in prison was assured for me, let alone, and that of course, but what the harm I could have caused to other people, I inevitably would have caused to other people, was avoided thanks to aligning with this knowledge. So we have a list. Let's go through the list, because I've added some crimes at the end. Criminal conspiracy, racketeering, extortion, coercion, harassment, deception, pimping, drug dealing, scamming, theft, rape, murder, and kidnapping. The government is engaged in all of those on multiple levels. But is there another crime? Is there a crime I forgot? Yeah, there's a crime I forgot. What if I were to be, even if I were to be kidnapped, arrested, and thrown into jail, what would happen to me? What would really happen? The same thing that's already happening right now. The same thing that's happening to you right now, and happening to everybody else in this world. What would happen if I were to be kidnapped, or whatever, is the final crime. Worse than all these other crimes, and it goes on 24 hours a day to everybody, and is ultimately even more heinous than rape itself. The ultimate crime is slavery. It's slavery. And I just recorded episode 15 of This Week in Tyranny, where this card, the devil card, came up. Episode 15. Today is Saturday, March 18th, Manly P. Hall's birthday. And the card comes up, and I don't plan these things, but that's slavery. The devil card means slavery, and this is the definition of slavery: the state of a person who is held in forced servitude, a situation or practice in which the people are entrapped as by debt and exploited. That's the definition of slavery. In other words, it is being held in a state where you own no property and are not able to keep the fruits of your labor. That's what happens when you go to jail, right? You're entrapped and you can't keep the fruits of your labor. That's what happens when you go to jail. But guess what? Jail is only a specialized, specific section of the global plantation reserved for the most difficult, stubborn, and uncontrollable slaves. But this is happening to all of us. Because if you can get a ticket on your car, and you have to pay taxes on your house, and you have to pay taxes on your check that you make every week. You're not able to keep the fruits of your labor, and you're entrapped by debt. That is slavery. This is the image I use. Actual slavery that happened in my country. That's why I talk about Poland all the time. So I feel pretty strongly about this, because this is 80 years ago or less of a camp. It's actually an all-female camp, which, by the way, my great-grandmother was actually in one of these camps. I have family members that have been here, right? Have experienced this kind of slavery, as in that black and white picture right there, doing hard labor for the Nazi military. That's actual slavery, but that's the state that we're in, and we're heading back to that. We're heading back towards the striped uniforms. Can you believe that? In this country, in this beautiful nation, United States of America, we're headed towards that. And nobody says anything. We're heading towards slavery. Not me. Not on my watch. I'm free. I'm a freed slave. I'm a former slave. Right? Former criminal. I'm not going back. And that's why I do what I do, because I want you to break free. And you could come with me, or you could walk in the opposite direction, but I will not stand for slavery. Right? Slavery is basically anybody who enslaves others or supports that basically makes it clear to me that they do not deserve to take another breath, just like a child predator. So somebody who's like a pedophile, to me, instantly, by even if they never touch a child, by speaking that thought into the world and advocating for that, you forfeit your breath. And no, I do not own your breath, but under natural law, I will actually exercise that, whether it is right or wrong. But it is right under natural law, because if the breaths you are taking are transformed into the thoughts that are perpetuating, creating a state where you're going to hurt innocence in the world, you're not using that breath in a rightful manner. We're sharing it, and you're taking it from somebody. Where everybody who is drawing breath, taking breath, should be sharing it in a dignified manner, aligned with divine spirituality, recognizing and respecting everybody's property, because they are a part of the divine. So we can take as much breath as we want. We can drink as much water as we want. We could hoard even and acquire as much wealth as we want. The condition being, everybody else is here too. So we need to respect all of that for them. We need to respect that potential. And the ultimate way to violate that is putting somebody in a state of slavery and putting a box around the breath that they can draw. You know what? The history of humanity is a history of slavery. This is the truth. We are a slave species, and that's why the people won't change, because they're actually it's been biologically embedded into them actually to be slaves in their genetic memory. But this will go a long way, and after I die, I hope this spirit stays on this earth and keeps gaining momentum, because we're gonna roll over the system of slavery, and they need to roll with us, or they get rolled over. And it is like that. It is just like that. The knowledge of this fact, that humanity has a history of slavery, is the beginning of the healing process. That's the end of denial and the end of foolishness. So I'm not calling for revenge or retaliation. I'm not calling for war or rebellion directly. I'm not immediately calling for those things. As angry as I get, when I don't actually desire to cut the master's heads off. Like, that's not what will make me happy. I'm not motivated by revenge. I'm not calling for revenge or retaliation. I'm calling for streetwise spirituality. I'm motivated by love, by everybody to come into that and become the best version of themselves, and to help the people, to share with each other. Motivated by love, and once we do that, we will know the right thing to do. And maybe that will be rebellion, maybe that will be revolution, maybe it will be revenge, but once we do that, we will know. And know, the right thing to do is to know, and the right thing to do is to say no. K-N-O-W, to know something. And the word N-O, negative, meaning no, we will not do that. And this is a fork in the road. Humanity's critical moment of choice is this: to continue on the neatly paved road to a new dark age, or step into the role of a free human being and help us make this world a better place. And at the end of the day, the name of the game is to reduce pain and suffering of the innocent, to heal them from that unjust harm, and heal them through our sacrifice. That's the name of the game. It's love and it's healing. Well, I said I was going to talk about solutions, but this is already over 2 hours. Am I going to talk another 2 hours about solution? No, it's pretty quick actually. What is the solution? How do victims of crime heal? How does the story of crime end? End with justice. And the solutions in life are simple. They're actually right on that card. We got 2 of them. The sword or the scales. There's really only 2 solutions. The solutions in life are simple. But people want a get-rich-quick scheme. I know they want a guru. They want anything except the immovable elegance of natural law, which makes people terribly anxious. I notice this in my conversations with people. When you really know something, and you know that there's only one way thing is, and people notice that you don't really have to think about what you're saying or use rhetorical techniques. You know, like on a very clear level. If they ask you a trick question, you know the answer like this. That makes people incredibly anxious because they subconsciously sense the implication when you talk about natural law that way, that there is no easy way, there's only the right way, and it's usually the hard way. People don't like that, but you know what that implication is? If there is a cosmic justice of cause and effect, and there is, as seen in this justice card. Oh, by the way, this justice card, that's not like a human, I'm not talking about justice as like a human creation, a human concept. This is the creator himself, right? This is the law that this world and all the other worlds and the universe has to align itself to. This is the law of the universe, and therefore this is the only image we can make of the creator. We cannot make an image of him because he is the law. So this is how we need to think of it, the laws of cause and effect. That's what the God is, okay? And if there is that cosmic justice, if there is a God, and that's who he is, then that means that all of the power and responsibility is within you. That's the implication. Justice is God the Creator. He holds the sword, and the sword represents truth. You should check out my video, The Sword, 6-minute video. And the scales. And the scales represent the law. Was harm caused or not? Was it correct and right? Was it moral or was it immoral? And this is why my channel and website is called Truth and Law. This is who I serve. The truth, which is justice, which is that thing that'll cut through illusions, and law, which is the scales that will always tell you, is this right or not? That's who I serve. And as for solutions, there are basically 2. We can get it done with the scales or the sword. That's it. Thank you very much. It's been a great year. Thank you for accompanying me through this long presentation. That's all that needs to be said. Justice. That's what we need. And let's not forget, it's all about love. It's not about hatred. It's not about spilling blood out here. But that's what the criminals are doing. So sometimes that emotion of shame, that emotion of anger, that's a good thing. That's letting us know, hey, something's not right out here. So we got the scales. We could see that what's going on out here is imbalanced. We could tip the scales. Or we could use the sword. Thank you.